Jake Morrison stood at the edge of the cargo bay, staring down at the alien world below. The planet Zarian 7 spun slowly beneath the USS Meridian, its surface covered in red and brown swirls that looked like dried blood. The crimson marsh stretched. Across half the northern continent, a deadly maze of water and twisted trees that had killed every team sent to explore it. "You sure about this, Morrison?" Captain Rodriguez asked, checking the equipment one last time. "No one has ever come back from that swamp alive?" Jake adjusted his tactical gear and checked his weapon. "Someone has to try, sir. The intel we need is down there." The mission was simple in theory, but deadly in practice. Zarian 7 held valuable mineral deposits that could power human ships for centuries. But the planet belonged to the Galactic Council, and they refused to let humans mine it. The Council claimed humans were too primitive, too violent to handle such resources responsibly. Commander Vex of the Zentari Empire walked into the cargo bay. The alien stood 8 feet tall with gray skin and 4 arms. His yellow eyes looked at Jake with something between amusement and disgust. "The human still insists on this foolish mission?" Vex said in perfect English. "My people lost 12 warriors in that marsh last year. The Karathi sent 20 soldiers 2 months ago. None returned." Dr. Lisa Carter stepped forward, her tablet in hand. "We've studied the data from your failed missions, Commander. We think we can do better." Vex laughed, a sound like grinding metal. "Humans think they are special. You have no natural armor like the Karathi, no energy weapons like my people, no telepathic abilities like the Vorthok. What makes you think you can succeed where superior species have failed?" Jake looked out at the swamp below. The red water moved strangely, creating patterns that hurt to look at directly. "Maybe that's exactly why we'll succeed." The Zentari commander shook his head. "Your species survived only because you learned to use tools before leaving your homeworld. In the Crimson Marsh, tools will not save you. The creatures there adapt faster than your primitive minds can think." Dr. Carter pulled up her research on the tablet. "The marsh ecosystem is unlike anything we've seen. The water contains organisms that can change their chemical structure in minutes. The predators can alter their appearance to match their surroundings perfectly. Some can even mimic the pheromones of other species." Jake studied the data. The previous expedition reports all told the same story. Teams entered the marsh with advanced weapons and protective gear. Within hours, something would attack. The lucky ones died quickly. The others were found days later, changed somehow, driven mad by toxins or parasites. "The longest any team lasted was 6 hours and 14 minutes, Dr. Carter continued. "That was a Zentari Special Forces unit with full environmental suits and plasma weapons." "And they all died screaming," Vex added coldly. "The marsh drove them insane before it killed them." Jake picked up his pack. It contained basic survival gear, some food, water purification tablets, and a simple projectile weapon. No advanced technology that might fail in the alien environment. No heavy armor. That would slow him down. "The drop zone is here," Dr. Carter pointed to a spot on the map. "It's the safest entry point we could find. The water is only about 10 feet deep, and there's solid ground nearby." Vex studied the location. "That is where my warriors entered. They made it exactly 47 meters before something killed them all. The cargo bay doors began to open. Wind rushed in, carrying the smell of the alien world below. It was a mixture of rotting plants, sulfur, and something else Jake couldn't identify, something alive and hungry. "Your mission parameters are simple," Captain Rodriguez said. "Get in, gather intel on the local ecosystem, identify potential threats to future mining operations, and get out alive. 7 days maximum," Jake nodded. "And if I don't make it back?" "Then we prove the Council right," Rodriguez replied grimly. "Humans aren't ready for this galaxy." The ship's communication officer called out, "Drop zone in 30 seconds." Dr. Carter grabbed Jake's arm. "Remember what we discussed? Don't fight the environment. Try to understand it. Every creature in that marsh has survived millions of years of evolution. They know things we don't." Vex watched with interest as Jake prepared for the drop. "You carry no energy weapons." No protective suit. How do you expect to survive what killed my best warriors? Jake looked at the alien commander. Your people have ruled the galaxy for thousands of years. You've got technology we can barely understand. But there's one thing humans do better than anyone else. And what is that? Vex asked. We adapt. The drop light turned green. Jake stepped to the edge of the cargo bay and looked down at the red waters of the Crimson Marsh. Somewhere in that deadly maze was the key to humanity's future. Among the stars. All he had to do was survive long enough to find it. See you in 7 days, he said, and jumped. The fall took almost a minute. Jake's parachute deployed automatically, guiding him toward the designated landing zone. As he descended, he could see the marsh in detail for the first time. The water wasn't just red, it was moving, flowing in patterns that defied physics. Trees twisted up from the depths like giant hands reaching for the sky. He hit the water hard, the impact driving him deep beneath the surface. The liquid was warm and thick, more like blood than water. Strange shapes moved in the depths below him. As he swam toward the surface, something brushed against his leg. Something large and curious. Jake broke the surface and took his first breath of Zarian 7's atmosphere. The air was breathable but heavy, filled with spores and microscopic life forms that made his skin tingle. Around him, the marsh was alive with sounds, clicks, whistles, and low rumbles that seemed to come from everywhere at once. He swam toward the nearest patch of solid ground, a small island covered in twisted vegetation as his feet touched the muddy bottom. He felt vibrations through the water. Something was coming. Something big. Jake pulled himself onto the island and immediately crouched low, trying to make himself invisible. The water around the island began to bubble and churn. Whatever was down there, it knew he was here. This was only the beginning. Jake pressed himself against the twisted trunk of an alien tree and held his breath. The water around his small island continued to bubble and move. Something was circling beneath the surface, something that had noticed his arrival. He could feel its presence through the vibrations in the muddy ground. After 10 minutes of waiting, the disturbance in the water stopped. Jake slowly raised his head and looked around. The marsh stretched in all directions, a maze of red water and strange vegetation. In the distance, he could see larger islands covered in thick jungle-like growth. Getting to them would mean swimming through open water where whatever lived below could easily catch him. He activated his communicator. Morrison to Meridian, do you copy? Static filled the channel for several seconds before Dr. Carter's voice came through. We read you, Jake. How's the welcome party? Something big knows I'm here, Jake replied quietly. The water's full of movement. I need to find a way across without becoming lunch. The previous teams all tried to fight their way through, Carter sighed. Maybe try a different approach. Jake studied the water more carefully. The red liquid moved in strange patterns, but now he could see there was a rhythm to it. Currents flowed in specific directions, creating channels between the deeper areas. More importantly, he noticed that certain areas remained calm while others churned with activity. I need to understand this place before I can move through it, he told Carter. Give me some time to observe. Jake spent the next 3 hours watching the marsh ecosystem. He saw his first alien creatures during that time. Long, snake-like animals with multiple fins swam through the red water. They moved in groups, following the underwater currents. When they approached areas where the water bubbled and churned, they quickly changed direction. The snake creatures weren't the apex predators. They were prey, and they knew which areas to avoid. Jake also noticed flying creatures that skimmed the surface of the water. They looked like a cross between birds and bats with translucent wings and long beaks. These creatures would suddenly dive into the water, grab something, and fly away. But they too avoided certain areas, never hunting where the water moved. In those strange patterns, Carter, are you getting this? Jake whispered into his communicator while recording everything with his helmet camera. We're seeing it all, she replied. The ecosystem has clear predator-prey relationships. The question is, what's at the top of the food chain? Jake got his answer 20 minutes later. A group of the snake creatures was swimming near his island when the water suddenly exploded upward. Something huge burst from the depths, grabbed 3 of the creatures, and disappeared back beneath the surface in less than 2 seconds. The attack came from one of the areas where the water moved in those spiral patterns. Jake realized the patterns weren't random, they were hunting zones. The apex predators created them somehow, marking their territory in the water itself. "Did you see that?" he asked Carter. "Affirmative. Whatever's down there is fast and strong. The bio readings suggest it's at least 15 feet long." Jake needed to move, but swimming across open water was suicide. He looked around his small island and noticed something interesting. Small, glowing creatures about the size of his thumb were attached to several of the plants. They pulsed with soft blue light, and wherever they clustered, the local vegetation looked healthier. He carefully approached one of the glowing creatures. It didn't try to escape when he got close. Instead, it seemed curious about him, pulsing, its light in different patterns. Jake slowly extended his hand toward it. The creature immediately attached itself to his glove. Jake felt a slight tingling sensation, but no pain. Within seconds, 2 more of the creatures had joined the first. 1. They began pulsing their lights in synchronization. "Jake, what are you doing?" Carter's voice was concerned. "Testing a theory," he replied. "These things might be symbiotic. They seem to help the plants they attach to." Jake waded into the shallow water at the edge of his island. The glowing creatures on his hand continued their synchronized pulsing. As he moved deeper, more of the creatures appeared in the water around him. They didn't attack or flee, they seemed attracted to the ones already on his glove. Within minutes, Jake had dozens of the small creatures attached to his gear and clothing. They covered his arms, shoulders, and backpack with soft blue light. The effect was startling. He looked like a walking constellation in the dim marsh environment. More importantly, the larger predators seemed to avoid him. Jake waded through water that had been churning with dangerous movement just hours before. The spiral patterns that marked hunting territories remained, but the creatures creating them stayed away from his glowing escort. "It's working," he reported to Carter. "These little guys are like a passport. The big predators won't attack something covered in them." "Why?" Carter asked. "What's so special about those creatures?" Jake collected a sample of the marsh water and noticed something remarkable. Where the glowing creatures had been swimming, the water was cleaner. The red color was less intense, and the chemical readings on his scanner showed lower toxin levels. They clean the water, Jake realized. The predators need them to survive. Attacking something covered in these creatures would be like poisoning their own environment. He began swimming toward the larger islands, guided by his new alien companions. The journey that should have been impossible became merely difficult. Predators watched him from the depths but kept their distance. The glowing creatures had made him untouchable. As Jake reached the first large island, he discovered something even more interesting. The island was covered in a strange moss-like substance that seemed to shift and change color as he watched. When he stepped onto the shore, the moss immediately began copying the pattern and color of his boots. "Carter, you need to see this," he said, crouching down to examine the moss more closely. The substance was incredibly responsive. When Jake placed his hand on it, the moss changed to match the color and texture of his skin within seconds. Even more remarkable, it seemed to copy scent as well. The moss began producing pheromones similar to human sweat. "It's a universal mimic," Carter's voice was excited. "That moss can copy anything it comes in contact with." Jake carefully scraped some of the moss into a sample container, then smeared more of it on his gear. Within minutes, his equipment had taken on the color and texture of the island's vegetation. He was becoming invisible in the alien environment. "The previous teams tried to fight this place," Jake said as he prepared to explore deeper into the island. "They brought advanced weapons and armor, trying to impose their technology on an alien world. And what are you doing differently?" Carter asked. Jake looked at his arms, covered in glowing symbiotic creatures, then at his gear, camouflaged by alien moss. "I'm letting the world change me instead." By the third day, Jake had become something unrecognizable. The mimic moss covered most of his equipment, changing color and texture as he moved through different parts of the marsh. The glowing creatures had multiplied, creating a living constellation across his body that pulsed with strange rhythms. But the real transformation came from what he had learned about becoming a predator. Jake crouched beside a pool of dark water, watching a group of the snake-like creatures feed on smaller organisms. Over the past 2 days, he had mapped their behavior patterns, learned their feeding schedules, and discovered their weaknesses. Now he was ready to test his new understanding. He slipped into the water without making a sound. The mimic moss on his suit had copied the texture of underwater plants, while chemical secretions from the glowing creatures masked his human scent. To the snake creatures, he looked and smelled like part of the marsh itself. Jake moved through the water like a shadow, getting close enough to touch the feeding animals. They showed no fear because their senses told them he belonged here. When he was ready, Jake struck with lightning speed, grabbing the largest snake creature behind its head. The creature thrashed for a few seconds, then went still. Jake had learned that applying pressure to a specific spot on their necks would paralyze them temporarily. He quickly extracted some of their natural secretions and released the creature unharmed. Within minutes, it swam away, apparently unaware of what had happened. "Morrison, report your status." Captain Rodriguez's voice crackled through his communicator. "Day 3, all systems functional," Jake replied quietly. "I've collected samples from 7 different species and mapped approximately 4 square kilometers of the marsh and the legendary predator." Commander Vex's voice joined the conversation. "Have you encountered the creature that killed my warriors?" Jake looked across the red water toward a distant area where the current moved in massive spiral patterns. He had been studying those patterns for 2 days, learning to read the signs. "I know where it lives. And I think I know what it is." "Explain," Dr. Carter said. "The locals don't call it by a species name," Jake replied, applying the snake creatures' secretions to his gear. "They call it the Devourer. That's not describing what it is, that's describing what it does. It's a title." Jake had spent hours listening to the sounds of the marsh, learning to distinguish between different calls and warnings. The flying creatures had a specific cry they made when the big predator was active. The snake creatures would cluster in certain areas when it was hunting. Even the plants seemed to react to its presence. "The Devourer isn't one creature," Jake continued. "It's whatever happens to be the apex predator in each region of the marsh. In this area, it's something the size of a small submarine with tentacles and bioelectric abilities." Through careful observation, Jake had learned that the current Devourer was a massive, cephalopod-like creature that could generate electrical fields in the water. It used these fields to stun prey and communicate with smaller members of its species. But more importantly, it was territorial. "The creature hasn't just been hunting the exploration teams," Jake explained. "It's been defending its territory. Every team that entered the marsh came in with weapons and technology that registered as threats." Jake had been preparing for 3 days to challenge the Devourer on its own terms. He had collected scent markers from dozens of smaller predators and learned to mimic their territorial displays. The snake creature's secretions would mask his human scent, while the mimic moss would make him appear larger and more threatening, but his real advantage was understanding. Something the creature couldn't comprehend: human tactical thinking. "Going to take its territory," Jake announced. "That's suicide," Rodriguez replied immediately. "The bio readings on that thing suggest it's the size of a killer whale." "Maybe," Jake said, "but it's never fought a human before." Jake spent the next several hours preparing his approach. He moved through the marsh collecting materials, shed scales from various creatures, toxic plants that could be used as weapons, and most importantly, scent glands from the territorial markers of smaller predators, using techniques he had learned in survival training. Jake created false territorial markers around the edges of the Devourer's hunting ground. To the creature's senses, it would appear that multiple predators were challenging its dominance simultaneously. "Morrison, we're detecting massive movement in your area," Carter reported. "Whatever you did, it's working. The creature is agitated." "Jake, could feel the vibrations through the water as the devourer moved toward his position. The electrical fields it generated made his skin tingle even at a distance. But he held his ground, continuing to place territorial markers in strategic locations. The first glimpse of the creature confirmed his estimates. It was enormous, easily 30 feet long, with 8 thick tentacles and a body covered in bioluminescent patches. Its skin could change color and texture instantly, making it blend perfectly with the red water and dark vegetation. But Jake had advantages the creature had never encountered. He could think several steps ahead, plan complex strategies, and most importantly, he could bluff Dot as the devourer approached. Jake began his territorial display. He had studied how the various marsh predators asserted dominance, specific movements, sound patterns, and chemical signals. Now he mimicked them all simultaneously, creating a display that suggested he was something entirely new and dangerous. The creature paused, clearly confused by the mixed signals Jake was broadcasting. Its tentacles writhed as it tried to identify what kind of predator it was facing. Jake used that moment of hesitation to implement his real strategy. He had spent 2 days identifying the creature's preferred prey and hunting patterns. Now he began systematically hunting in the creature's territory, taking its food sources and marking the kills with his own scent. "Jake, your bio readings are off the charts," Carter reported. "Your adrenaline levels suggest you're in active combat." "Not combat," Jake replied, dragging his latest kill to a prominent location where the devourer would certainly find it. "Competition." For the next 6 hours, Jake played a deadly game of territorial dominance with the marsh's apex predator. He stole its prey, invaded its hunting grounds, and left challenging scent markers throughout its domain. The creature grew, increasingly agitated, but it was also becoming cautious. Jake was demonstrating behaviors no creature in the marsh had ever shown. He was systematic, unpredictable, and seemingly unafraid of the devourer's size and power. More confusing to the creature, Jake's scent signatures kept changing as the mimic moss and alien secretions altered his chemical profile. As night fell on the 3rd day, Jake made his final move. He entered the deepest part of the devourer's territory, the area where the creature had made its primary lair. There, surrounded by the bones of countless prey animals, Jake began the most dangerous part of his plan. He started to feed. Jake sat in the heart of the devourer's lair, calmly eating the raw flesh of a snake creature he had killed minutes earlier. Around him lay the bones of hundreds of previous meals, arranged in patterns that marked this as the territory of the marsh's apex predator. The water here was deeper and darker than anywhere else, perfect for an ambush. He knew the devourer was watching him from somewhere in the murky depths. He could feel the electrical fields the creature generated, weak pulses that told him it was close but confused by his presence. No creature had ever entered this sacred space and simply begun eating as if it belonged there. "Morrison, we're reading massive bioelectric activity in your area." Dr. Carter's voice was tense through the communicator. "That thing is right on top of you." "I know," Jake replied quietly, taking another bite of the alien meat. The taste was horrible, but eating the creature's preferred prey in its own lair was the ultimate territorial challenge. "It's trying to figure out what I am." Jake had spent 3 days studying the devourer's behavior patterns. Like most apex predators, it was intelligent but limited by instinct. It understood dominance displays, territorial challenges, and the complex social hierarchy of the marsh. What it didn't understand was psychological warfare. The water began to churn around Jake's position. The devourer was moving, circling him in the depths below. Jake continued eating, showing no fear or acknowledgement of the creature's presence. To the alien predator, this behavior was impossible to interpret. "Jake, you need to get out of there," Captain Rodriguez ordered. "That creature could kill you in seconds." "That's the point," Jake replied. "If it was going to kill me, it would have done it already. Right now, it's confused. Confusion leads to mistakes." Jake had learned something important about the marsh ecosystem during his 3 days of observation. Every creature here followed predictable patterns based on millions of years of evolution. They had specific responses to specific stimuli. But Humans were unpredictable, and that made them dangerous in ways the local predators couldn't understand. The devourer finally revealed itself, rising from the depths like a nightmare made real. Its massive body broke the surface of the water, tentacles spreading wide in a classic intimidation display. Bioluminescent patches along its skin flashed in angry patterns, and the electrical field it generated made Jake's teeth ache. Jake looked up at the creature and continued eating. He showed no fear, no surprise, no recognition of the devourer's dominance display. Instead, he slowly reached for another piece of meat and bit into it while maintaining eye contact with the creature. The devourer's tentacles writhed in confusion. Its intimidation display was failing completely. In the creature's experience, all other predators would either flee or respond with their own aggressive display. Jake was doing neither. "What are you?" The creature seemed to ask through a series of electrical pulses and color changes. Jake finished his meal and slowly stood up. The mimic moss covering his equipment had absorbed so many different textures and colors that he looked like a living part of the marsh itself. The glowing creatures attached to his body pulsed in patterns that suggested he was some kind of symbiotic colony organism. His scent, altered by days of alien secretions, was unlike anything the devourer had encountered. Jake began his own display, but it wasn't based on any alien species the devourer knew. It was purely human, a psychological profile designed to exploit the creature's confusion and territorial instincts. He moved slowly around the lair, examining the bone arrangements with apparent interest. He picked up some of the skulls, studied them, then rearranged them in new patterns. To human eyes, his actions might seem random, but to the devourer, Jake was systematically claiming ownership of the creature's most prized possessions. The devourer's electrical field intensified. Its tentacles began moving in aggressive patterns, but it still didn't attack. Jake's behavior was so far outside its experience that the creature couldn't decide how to respond. Jake knew he had reached the critical moment. The devourer was caught between confusion and rage, unsure whether to fight or flee. This was when most creatures made fatal mistakes. He moved to the center of the lair and began the most dangerous part of his plan. Jake started hunting in the devourer's presence, catching and killing smaller creatures that lived in the deep water. But instead of eating them himself, he offered them to the devourer in a gesture that completely violated every territorial instinct the creature possessed. "Morrison, what are you doing?" Carter asked urgently. "Establishing a new relationship," Jake replied, holding out a freshly killed fish-like creature toward the massive predator. "I'm not challenging its territory. I'm claiming it as my own and offering to share." The devourer's response was immediate and violent. Its tentacles lashed out toward Jake, moving faster than human reflexes could follow. But Jake had anticipated this reaction. He had spent 3 days studying the creature's attack patterns, and had positioned himself accordingly. Instead of trying to dodge the attack, Jake moved toward it. As the tentacles swept through the water where he had been standing, Jake dove beneath them and grabbed onto the creature's main body. The mimic moss on his suit immediately began copying the devourer's skin texture, while the glowing creatures attached to him pulsed in synchronization with the predator's bioluminescent patches. The devourer thrashed wildly, trying to shake Jake loose, but the human held on with techniques learned from years of combat training. More importantly, Jake's presence was causing the creature's own electrical field to feedback on itself, creating painful disruptions in its nervous system. "Jake, your vital signs are critical," Carter reported. "The electrical field is affecting your heart rhythm." Jake could feel his heart skipping beats as the creature's bioelectric defenses overwhelmed his nervous system. But he had one final card to play. During his study of the marsh ecosystem, he had noticed that all the apex predators had one thing in common: they avoided certain areas where toxic gases vented from underground. Using his grip on the devourer's body, Jake began steering the creature's thrashing toward one of these gas vents. The predator was so focused on trying to remove the strange parasite attached to its body that it didn't notice where their struggle was taking them. When they reached the toxic area, Jake released his grip and swam upward as fast as his burning lungs would allow. Below him, the Devourer suddenly found itself surrounded by clouds of poisonous gas that erupted. From fissures in the marsh floor, the creature's thrashing became desperate as the toxins affected its respiratory system. Its electrical field flickered and weakened. For the first time in its life, the apex predator of the Crimson Marsh was vulnerable. Jake surfaced near the edge of the gas cloud, gasping for clean air. Through the toxic haze, he could see the Devourer struggling to escape the trap. The creature was wounded but not dead, exactly as Jake had planned. He had learned something crucial about territorial behavior during his study of the marsh. Defeating an apex predator wasn't about killing it. It was about proving superiority in a way the creature could understand and accept. As the gas cloud cleared, Jake swam back toward the wounded Devourer. The creature watched his approach with eyes that showed a new emotion: respect. Jake had done something no other predator in the marsh had ever accomplished. He had outhought the apex predator and demonstrated tactical superiority. Jake placed his hand on the creature's massive head in a gesture of dominance tempered with mercy. The Devourer's bioluminescent patches pulsed once in acknowledgement. Then the creature slowly sank back into the depths of its lair. The territory was his. Now, according to the natural laws of the Crimson Marsh, Jake Morrison had become the new Devourer. Jake stood at the edge of the Crimson Marsh as the seventh day dawned, watching the extraction shuttle descend from orbit. He barely looked human anymore. The mimic moss had become a permanent part of his equipment, shifting colors and textures automatically as he moved. Dozens of glowing creatures pulsed along his arms and shoulders like living jewelry. His skin had adapted to the alien toxins, developing a slight reddish tint that matched the marsh water, but the real change was in his eyes. They held the calm confidence of an apex predator, the steady gaze of something that had claimed dominance over one of the galaxy's most hostile environments. "Morrison, this is Extraction Team," came the voice through his communicator. "We have you on visual. Please confirm your identity." Jake almost smiled at the request. After 7 days in the marsh, he probably looked more alien than human. "This is Sergeant Jake Morrison, Marine Corps Service Number 2847 Delta 9. Permission to come aboard?" The shuttle landed on a small island Jake had cleared for the pickup. As the ramp lowered, Captain Rodriguez stepped out, followed by Dr. Carter and Commander Vex. All three stopped short when they saw what Jake had become. "My God," Carter whispered, pulling out her scanner. "Jake, your biological readings are unlike anything I've ever seen. Your body has adapted to the local environment in ways that should be impossible." Commander Vex approached more cautiously, his forearms tense and ready for action. "This is not the same human we sent down 7 days ago. What has happened to you?" Jake looked at the alien commander with eyes that had learned to see in the marsh's dim light, to read the electrical fields of predators, to understand the complex chemical communications of dozens of species. "I survived, Commander. Just like I said I would." "The Devourer," Vex said quietly. "Our sensors detected massive bioelectric activity in this region 3 days ago, then nothing." "What happened to the creature that killed my warriors?" "It recognized a superior predator," Jake replied simply. "The territory belongs to me now?" Dr. Carter's scanner was beeping frantically as she tried to make sense of Jake's biological data. "This is incredible. Your immune system has developed resistance to over 40 different alien toxins. Your muscle density has increased by 12%. Even your brain chemistry has changed. You're processing sensory information at speeds that shouldn't be possible for humans." Jake watched a group of snake creatures surface near the shuttle, curious about the new arrivals but showing no fear. They recognized him as the marsh's new apex predator, and his presence made this area safe for them. "The mission objectives," Rodriguez said, trying to focus on practical matters. "Were you able to gather the intelligence we needed?" Jake pulled out a sealed container filled with biological samples and detailed recordings. "Complete ecosystem analysis, predator behavior patterns, safe travel routes, and mineral survey data. The mining operation is feasible, but it will require a completely different approach than standard council methods. Commander Vex studied the data on Jake's tablet, his yellow eyes widening as he scrolled through the information. These readings suggest the marsh contains resources worth more than entire star systems, but how do you propose to extract them safely? The same way I survived, Jake said, by working with the ecosystem instead of against it. The marsh creatures can be partners, not obstacles. The key is understanding their needs and finding ways to benefit both species. Dr. Carter was still trying to process Jake's transformation. The symbiotic organisms you've bonded with, they're not just attached to your equipment anymore. They've integrated with your nervous system? You're receiving and processing information from them directly, Jake nodded. They show me things human senses can't detect. Chemical trails, electrical fields, underground water currents. I can read this marsh like a book now. A low rumble echoed across the water. In the distance, the former devourer surfaced briefly, acknowledging Jake's presence before disappearing back into the depths. The creature had accepted its new role in the marsh hierarchy, becoming Jake's lieutenant rather than his enemy. Impossible. Vex breathed. You have tamed the untamable creature. Not tamed, Jake corrected. Negotiated with. The devourer understands strength and intelligence. Once I proved I possessed both, we were able to establish a working relationship. Captain Rodriguez looked around the marsh with new understanding. So the mining operation can proceed, Jake confirmed, but it will require human oversight. The Council's member species think too rigidly, too technologically. They try to impose their will on alien environments through force. Humans adapt, integrate, evolve. Commander Vex was quiet for a long moment, studying Jake with something approaching. My people have ruled the galaxy for 3,000 years. We have conquered hundreds of worlds through superior technology and military might. But what you have accomplished here is something only humans can do, Jake finished. We don't just survive hostile environments, we become part of them. As they prepared to leave the marsh, Jake felt a strange reluctance. This place had changed him in fundamental ways, shown him capabilities he never knew he possessed. He was no longer just a human soldier. He was something new, a bridge between human adaptability and alien evolution. There's something else, Jake said as they boarded the shuttle. I won't be the only one. Other humans can do what I've done, but they'll need training, proper preparation. The right mindset, Dr. Carter looked up from her readings. You're talking about creating an entire corps of adapted humans. The Human Adaptive Corps, Jake said, the name forming naturally in his mind. Specialists trained to become apex predators on alien worlds, to integrate with hostile ecosystems and establish human dominance through evolution rather than technology. Commander. Vex shook his head in amazement. The Council will never believe this report. A primitive species that can adapt to any environment become the dominant predator on any world. Then maybe it's time the Council reconsidered what makes a species truly advanced. Rodriguez said with pride. As the shuttle lifted off from the Crimson Marsh, Jake watched his territory shrink below him. The marsh would continue its ancient cycles, but now it had a new element, human intelligence integrated with alien biology. He had proven that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology or their weapons. It was their ability to become whatever the universe required them to be. Back on the USS Meridian, Jake submitted his final report to Earth Command. The document would change everything: humanity's relationship with the Galactic Council, their approach to colonization, their understanding of their own potential. Subject Morrison has demonstrated conclusively that humans possess unique adaptive capabilities, he wrote in the mission summary. We don't just survive hostile alien environments. We evolve to dominate them. This isn't merely adaptation, this is active evolution in real time. Jake looked at his reflection in the shuttle window. The glowing creatures still pulsed along his arms. The mimic moss still shifted colors across his gear. He was no longer entirely human, but he was something more than human too. He was proof that humanity belonged among the stars, not as conquerors, or visitors, but as the ultimate survivors who could make any world their home, the galaxy had no idea what was coming.